Since so much of the discussion in D.C. is focused more on Biden's electoral chances, which is understandable, but also important are his actual abilities to govern. But since so much is focused on his electoral chances, let's take a look at the very latest of what the polls have to say about his political position. This dropped like a stone yesterday. You have all of these districts that are being moved by Cook Political Report, which, assesses all the races and says how likely they are to go Republican or go Democrat. You have 5 different races in 5 states that have now moved to worse ratings for Democrats because of Joe Biden. So this is all to do with the Senate. Arizona has moved from toss-up to lean R. Georgia, toss-up to lean R. Minnesota, likely D to lean D. New Hampshire, likely D to lean D. Nevada, toss-up to lean R. Let's put the next one up on the screen. This is really consequential. New York is apparently now a battleground state for Joe Biden. This is astonishing. No one should even be thinking. I mean, New York is like the definition of a safe state for Democrats. So the fact that the polls are narrowing in New York, at this point, most of the polling has been internal, but you have labor leaders there and swing district Democrats who are saying that their internal polling is looking like a disaster. And not that Trump would win it, but the fact that it's even a question mark at this point is incredibly astonishing. Part of why this is so important, Saagar, too, is one of the questions in terms of the political calculus for all of these cowards in Washington is, what does Joe Biden at the top of the ticket mean for me personally and my reelect? And the down ballot numbers are starting to look extremely dire. For those who think that people will just split ticket vote, and maybe they'll vote for Trump for president, but then they'll vote for Tammy Baldwin for Senate. That just doesn't really happen to a large extent in modern politics at this point. Harry Ensign took a look at this for CNN. Let's take a listen.
Biden, but the fact of the matter is, you look at the national polling, the generic congressional ballot choice for U.S. House. Look at this. CNN poll, +2 Republican. Wall Street Journal poll, +3 Republican. Monmouth University poll, +3 Republican. Yeah, Joe Biden may be in slightly worse shape in these particular polls, but the fact is, when Biden's down 4, 5, 6 points in these polls, you can only run so far ahead of Joe Biden. At this particular point, at least in the race for the House, it does seem like Republicans are ahead because Donald Trump is so far ahead.
What's the Senate landscape?
Yeah, what's the Senate landscape? I mean, take a look here. GOP needs just a gain of 1 for control if Trump wins. And their path is extremely clear because their best chance for a pickup opportunity is in West Virginia. That's a very likely GOP win with Joe Manchin retiring. And the best Dem pickup chance, perhaps to reverse that so the GOP doesn't gain a net gain of at least 1, is Texas. But that's still a likely GOP win. So the fact is, if Donald Trump wins this election, the race for the Senate, for all intents and purposes in my mind, is over. Let's go back since 2000. Same party won presidency and Congress. Yes, 5 times. No was just 1 time in 2012, the House that year. But the House popular vote that year actually went Democratic, even though Republicans maintained control of the House. So the fact is, 5 out of 6 times, that's not good math. And let's just take a look at the Senate here. Senate and presidential races in 2016 and 2020. States that voted the same way in both, 68. States that voted for a different party, just 1. That was Maine back in 2020. The fact is, straight ticket voting is the way of the land these days. The idea that Democrats down ballot could somehow outrun Joe Biden to such a great extent to win control in the House or maintain control in the Senate, that seems to be an unlikely proposition.
Very, very unlikely.
It's obvious.
You never know, but very unlikely. It's just how modern politics is.
There are certain examples that we can point to. Pennsylvania, right, where we had a pretty big split between people who voted for Dr. Oz, but who didn't vote for Doug Mastriano, and they did vote for Governor Josh Shapiro. It's what contributed to his wide margin. But in general, it doesn't really happen, especially at an aggregate level. And at the same time, that was in a race where the split ticket was in statewide election, not national. In general, after 2010, the federalization of American politics has made it so that that whole idea of the blue dog Democrat, it basically just doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. I mean, there's like maybe 1 or 2 people in a couple of these swings. The number of so-called swingy representatives in Congress is an all-time low for U.S. history. So if I were them, I just don't buy it. And we see a lot of this in the polling data. We see Carrie Lake now coming, neck and neck with Ruben Gallego. She was down by 14 points. Now she's tied with Ruben Gallego. I mean, if I'm Tammy Baldwin, I'm freaking out right now. So just because my net approval rating is higher than Biden, who cares? Huge portions of this population just come in and put straight R. Ever since they added that to the ballot, it's basically game over. Nevada, New Hampshire, all of these places, this is a real problem for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably likely that Democrats will outrun Joe Biden if he's still the nominee by some.
Right.
But we're seeing polls right now that have Tammy Baldwin outrunning him by 12 points.
I don't believe that. Yeah.
That's just not gonna. That's just not gonna happen. And the way this works is if the top of the ticket performs extraordinarily well, like Barack Obama in 2008, he had these giant coattails. All of these Democratic congressional races that people didn't think were in play, where you had candidates who, didn't raise a lot of money and weren't really known and Democrats weren't focused on them at all, they wake up and they're, oh my God, I won, right? So all these seats that people didn't think were possible, Democrats won. When you have a president who dramatically underperforms, it's exactly the opposite. There's a reverse coattail effect where you pull down people who you may not have even thought that they were potentially vulnerable. So however it plays out, however much Democrats are able to outrun him, every one of them is looking at this and saying, this is a problem for me. Every single member of the House is up. You've got a third of the Senate that's up. The Senate is probably gone for Democrats anyway, because as he lays out, they got to win Texas. They got to beat Ted Cruz this time, which, I think is fairly unlikely unless maybe they do put George Clooney and Michelle Obama at the top of the ticket or something. But the Senate is probably looking pretty grim for them. But the House, they feel like they've got a real shot at. The margin is already extremely narrow. I think if you had a good presidential nominee at the top of the ticket, they've got a better than even shot at picking it up. But not with this guy, not happening with this guy.
Yeah.
You also have increasing recognition among the party faithful that Biden should go. We can put this latest up on the screen. There's an interesting age divide here, though. Among all Democrats, it's +8. This is a YouGov poll from July 3rd to 6th. So it's a little bit dated, but this is, in the immediate aftermath of the debate. Should he step aside? All Democrats +8. Democrats 65 and older, though, the question is -35. So the younger you are, the more likely you are to say, get this guy out of here. That also tracks with his approval rating is much lower the younger you are among Democrats versus the older you are. But I also saw a new poll this morning. This was a new ABC Ipsos poll that just came out. And this is of all voters, 85% of voters say that Biden is too old for a second term. 85%. How do you overcome that? And then you've got, in this poll, 62% of Democrats saying Biden should step aside. So that would seem to indicate that Democratic base voters are moving against him really rapidly. And to all his claims that, black voters still back me up and we need to listen to black voters, which you see all the time on Twitter. Okay, well, let's listen to black voters. 67% say they'd be fine with Harris taking over from Biden. And we've even before the debate, we had a majority of black voters who said that they would like a different nominee than Joe Biden. So, but that headline, 85% of voters say Biden's too old for a second term. You think you're going to be able to overcome that? There's no way. There is no way.
It's only going to go higher, Krystal. That's what I think. I mean, and you're referencing that poll. I mean, when we look at it, including more than the 7 and the 10 independents. So the swing voters, the limited amount that are up for grabs that want Biden to go. I can't not spare, though, our boomer friends when you look at that, because
the numbers.
That just shows you, where the constituency for all this still hangs on. You've still got some -35% spread of the boomers who want him to stay in the race. I mean, 61% say he definitely should not drop out. What are these people doing? I mean, if anyone, they're the most familiar with age. But I think, look, here is my hope, and this is the only way I can try and spin what's happening here as a positive for the country. A devastating Biden loss due to age and/or getting forced out may actually be what forces us to be saved from the gerontocracy. Because what it means is that it is the final electoral signal to the Mitch McConnells, the Chuck Schumers, the Pelosi, and others to be like, it's over. It is Jover, if you will. All of this has got to end. People will actually pay a price for staying in much longer than they should have. And what these people should recognize is that you're doing, if you want to keep the gerontocracy or old folks in power, is that from now till time immemorial, the questions around age are going to be, what, 20, 50 times more than they ever were before?
Yeah.
I mean, in the Reagan and McCain years, everyone was like, well, it was a sensitive question. Now it's going to be like, no, straight up, like, show me your health records, everything that you've got, if you're over the age of 70.
On the other hand, Donald Trump is going to be serving into his 80s.
No, I agree, but that's part of what I'm saying.
I don't know that it'll be such a lesson learned, since you'll still have an octogenarian president in the office.
Right, but my thing is that after that, are we really going to renominate somebody who's 78 years old? Like, I don't think so. I think that, 2028, we're shaping up for it. No matter what happens, whoever wins or whatever, I think we're shaping up for maybe a couple 50-year-olds. And if Biden loses, think too about the rage of the Democratic base is going to be such that they will reward the Dean Phillips and others. And they're going to be like, look, anyone who's spoken out against this, and one of the most potent things that primary challengers will have, be like, it's time to go. You're too old.
Yeah.
And that will resonate at a deep level.
Well,
maybe I'm
it's actually ironic because that's how Joe Biden initially won his Senate seat.
1972?
I can't remember the name of the dude he was running against, but he'd been there forever. And he was like in his 60s. And he was like, he's too old.
Well, let me draw a parallel, though, because that's a very important time. The last time that the Democratic base took out their anger on the Democratic elites was the 1972 election. They were called the Watergate babies and in that time period. And it was the rage of the base against the party elites who led them into Vietnam and co-signed all of LBJ Hubert Humphrey's actions. Those elites were actually elected in the 1930s and 1940s and are the equivalent of the gerontocracy that we had today. Those congressmen and senators and others who came in, many of them actually continue to serve today, which is wild. But my point is just that there are revolutions that happen at this time, and every once in a while, the base and others wake up. They're like, we got to get these people out of here. So that is my prayer for what the result of this could be.
There have been some other, it is interesting right now because part of what is so fascinating are these just like weird coalitions of people who are on either side of this equation. And I do think that could potentially shake something loose. The other thing that's been hysterical to me is like the super Biden defenders. Now they hate the media.
Yes.
They think the media is being so unfair to Joe Biden, which is hilarious for a variety of reasons. But it also makes me kind of hopeful, like, oh, well, maybe they'll stop being so sycophantic and just trust whatever the media tells them about anything all the time, is my hope for a silver lining out of this. But my real take is just, it's chaos right now. How this is going to shake out, it's going to have massive lasting repercussions on American politics. There's no doubt about that. What those are going to be, I couldn't say. I don't know. It'll depend. Does he get out? Does he not get out? Does he win? Does he lose? How bad is it? Who replaced? All this stuff is still very much a live question, which is what makes it such an incredibly fascinating time to live through.
Absolutely.
We got one more here for you, which is pretty interesting. So one of the Joe Biden talking points has been that it's just this cabal of elites who wants him to step aside. Now, we just ran through the polling that shows you, of course, that's preposterous. It's also preposterous because the idea that Joe Biden has been some like man of the people is hilarious, especially because part of how he's convinced himself that he is like this super special political figure and he's the only one that could beat Trump and he was underestimated before, blah, 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 was by dint of his primary victory over Bernie Sanders in 2020. Now, we all know how that went down. It had very little to do with Joe Biden and his acumen. In fact, the fact that the former vice president had to be rescued by Obama and an actual elite cabal behind the scenes was pretty extraordinary. But that was never something that like an ordinary establishment Democrat would admit is the way all of that went down. But now you had Representative Adam Smith went on, I believe, multiple programs to remind people what that primary was actually about and how that actually went down. And it's pretty amazing to see a regular run-of-the-mill rank-and-file establishment Democrat admit what that process was actually all about. Let's take a listen.
And I've said this over and over again. Joe Biden was not picked in 2020 because he was the only person who could beat Trump. He was picked because he was the only person that could beat Bernie Sanders. Rightly or wrongly. And by the way, for the Sanders fans out there, I'm not judging, but that conclusion was made, okay? Oh my gosh, coming out of Nevada, Bernie Sanders is going to be the nominee. And people, just like they are now, back then said, yeah, I don't think that's going to work. So they were looking for an alternative. And tip of the hat to Joe Biden, he had the record. 8 great years as vice president.
It wasn't about he could beat Trump. It was about he could be Bernie Sanders. And so all of these elites that he's now pretending to be so against, meanwhile, he's calling them and doing his donor fundraising pitch and trying to smooth the waters. All of them moved against Bernie, moved in favor of Joe Biden, and that's how he ends up being the nominee. Funny that he can admit that now.
Yeah, it is funny. I mean, listen, all truth comes out on time.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, I mean, a lot of us knew it at the time, covered it as such. We're called conspiracy theorists, etc. But it is funny, you know. It certainly does reveal everything. We will see what happens here with Joe Biden. But I mean, that 85% one, I can't really get that out of my head because that's it.
85% saying you're too old to serve another term.
You can't get 85% of Americans to agree on anything.
Yeah.
Like literally anything. It's like, for this, I can't think of a more unifying position now for the American people.
Yeah, truly, it is extraordinary, and that's not some elite take. That is the will of the people, as it is.
There you go. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.